Hello, everyone. Welcome to Screenwalks. My name is Marco De Mutis. I'm digital curator at Fotomuseum Winterthur. Screenwalks is a collaborative program initiated by the Photographers Gallery in London and Fotomuseum Winterthur in Switzerland, with support by Pro Helvetia. This series of 4 nightly live-streamed events was created in 2020 as a joint effort by both institutions to continue the investigations of the changing role of photography in its digital and network forms. We invite researchers, curators, and artists to take us to digital and online spaces through different images and image cultures. Every event has a different format and allows us to take a peek at the properties of network images and online visual culture through the eyes of practitioners and researchers who perform the network in different ways. Screenwalks shows work in progress, performative lectures, workshops, behind the scenes, and any other experimental form. Our participants come up, playing with the properties and opportunities of the live stream. If this is your first Screenwalk, please check our archive on screenwalks.com or on our YouTube channel to find out more about our previous events. Now, for those of you in Zoom, your microphone should be muted. If that's not the case, please mute it now. The event will be recorded and will be archived, so please turn off your camera if you do not want to be recorded. Please use the public chat to ask your questions to Gabriele, or alternatively send a private message to John or myself.
Hello from my side too. I'm John Uriarte, curator of digital programs at the Photographers Gallery in London. Today we will focus on the machine vision industry and the image that these companies aim to project about themselves. Machine vision involves a range of methods for the machines to see the world, including image identification, recognition, and synthetic production technologies that are usually marketed with the popular term of artificial intelligence. We will be talking about a field that has evolved very quickly over the last few years and is already being used in a variety of real-life applications, including autonomous cars, surveillance systems, entertainment platforms, or artistic projects, among many others. The role of the network image is central to the development of machine vision from its inception to its deployment, starting from the millions of images that are used to build the datasets that train the algorithmic models up to the visual publicity that the companies create to present themselves and compete between each other. The rapid development of machine vision has relied on a techno-mythical image that computer scientists, universities, mass media, and private companies have built around it. An image that aims to avoid the critical scrutiny that activists and ethics scientists have raised when analyzing the harmful impact of these technologies. Gabriele de Seta will be presenting today Imagining Vision, an industry walkthrough, focusing on how Chinese machine vision companies portray themselves. Products ranging from image recognition platforms to smart city solutions, and from biometric identification systems to autonomous robots, showcase the variety and global competitiveness of the Chinese machine vision industry. Chinese technologies are subjected to increased scrutiny around the globe, but how exactly is machine vision portrayed by Chinese companies, and what kind of imaginaries does the industry embrace for its different audiences? Gabriele will take us into a journey through websites, social media pages, and user-generated content, delving into the visual tropes, cultural codes, and situated aesthetics of artificial intelligence products. Gabriele de Seta is a sociologist, or technically, that's what he says at least. He holds a PhD from the Hong Kong Polytechnic University and was a postdoctoral fellow at the Institute of Ethnology, Academia Sinica in Taipei. Gabriele is currently a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Bergen, where he is part of the ERC-funded project, Machine Vision in Everyday Life. His research work, grounded on ethnographic engagement across multiple sites, focuses on digital media practices, socio-technical entanglements, and vernacular creativity in Chinese-speaking world. He is also interested in experimental music, internet art, and collaborative intersections between anthropology and art practice. Gabriele, we are very happy and excited to have you today with us. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and the screen is yours.
Thank you. Well, thank you both for the great introduction, and thank you, John and Marco, for the invitation to do this. It was a pleasure to prepare. So I'm going to disappear, and I'm going to share my screen instead. But you should still be able to see me. So perfect. I mean, to see my screen, but to hear me. Yes, so welcome to this talk, which is titled Imagining Machine Vision. And before delving into the topic, I wanted to say a few words about the project I'm part of, which is called Machine Vision in Everyday Life. And it's a 5-year project here at the University of Bergen in Norway. And I am a postdoctoral researcher in this project, and we study the role of machine vision in everyday life by looking at a lot of different types of things, including narratives and artworks and video games. And if you go on the website, you can actually see a database we compiled with 500 individual works, and you can browse them by category, by technology or other parameters. So this is kind of the larger project from which I am currently working. This is an example of the database that is open, machinevision.no. So just in case anyone in the audience is curious. And for me, this concept of machine vision is quite generative, because it allows me to kind of look at a subset of artificial intelligence, because AI includes so many things, including recommender systems, natural language processing, industrial automation, big data science applications. So by just focusing on machine vision, I can kind of narrow down the scope a little bit. But still, machine vision is a huge field of study, and even when you limit to one country, in my case, China, it's still quite a huge endeavor to look into this. And China is actually one of the leading countries in artificial intelligence research and development. And machine vision is more than 1/3 of this market, according to recent reports. So it's still one of the primary ways in which artificial intelligence is applied and put into practice. And for my project, I look at machine vision in China in multiple ways, and my original plan included much more on-site fieldwork, which of course has become quite impossible in the past couple of years. But so I have resorted to do much more work, analytical work and participatory work through the internet. So I, of course, have been reading a lot of news and keeping track of the industry. One of the most globally debated machine vision issues related to China is, of course, the trade war with the US, in which a few huge machine vision companies have been blacklisted, and that's probably what most people have heard of on the topic. But I do look at news, and I do a lot of observation of social media and interviews with artists and artists who are working with these technologies. And I have written some things about the use of machine vision technologies in the past couple of years for epidemic governance that now we're all very familiar with. But this in China, this has been happening for the past 2 years, where social robots have been deployed in public, and QR codes have become the leading way to trace people and do contact tracing, and with technologies like face recognition and temperature checks have become more and more pervasive in everyday life. But one smaller part of this project is the one that I'm going to present today. And before I begin, I wanted to credit Anja Szeczwina, who's been collaborating with me on this specific part of the project for the past 6 months. She's at the University of Maastricht, and she's done a substantial part of the data collection and analysis. So even if she's not here today, she has contributed a lot to this presentation. And when I say we, I mean me and her, as we're writing up this research. And this is a poster that she prepared to present our first results. And I think the interesting part is, to begin, is just our sampling of companies. So but we have basically outlined 12 or 13 companies that are the leading Chinese companies offering machine vision products. So at the moment, we have gone through 6 of these, analyzing their website and how they present themselves online. And this is what I will be presenting today. That's the main part of the discussion. But to begin with something that's for sure familiar to everyone, I just did a Google search for computer vision in China or something like that. And the obvious image that a lot of people are familiar with is this sort of image. Images that are used in news articles about China, portraying usually crowds or masses or Chinese public citizens, usually with bounding boxes around their faces, or pedestrians identified as the full body, and often identified with labels like gender or type of clothing and maybe even emotion, or a score, which is often connected to this idea that China has a social credit score or connected to face recognition, something like that. So this image is actually extremely popular. It's been used in countless news articles, and there's a lot of variants. But when I started my project, I thought that this image was quite interesting because it showed how we, in Western, non-Chinese-speaking context, imagine the role of machine vision in Chinese everyday life. And of course, this is a substantial part of it, but I was curious and I wanted to know if other imaginaries are there in China, if other machine vision imaginaries are there to be found in China. And so I started looking at other things. And I started from television, actually. And for example, and I'm going to share some videos. This is a television program that depicts the everyday work of police precincts in China. And this specific episode was about a police precinct in Shanghai. And most of it is about policemen doing the everyday work of tracking petty thieves or criminals. And in this episode specifically, it shows how they use cameras and various tracking automated technologies. And what I found interesting is that even if you see these systems being used in practice, it's still a very human work. There's a human behind the screen that moves beyond different precincts and commercial venues and checking recordings and stuff like that. And actually, what we usually imagine as machine vision, in this case, I paused on this frame where there is a green glowing box seemingly identified the perpetrator. This was actually a special effect added by the television production afterwards to illustrate the optical power of these technologies. But in fact, this was a simple camera system, and the actual work of identifying the person was done by the policeman. So it's quite interesting to see how the systems are portrayed differently in imagination and then in actual practice. And to give you an example of the more imaginary or aspirational portrayal, this is a advertisement by China Mobile, who's one of the leading telecom providers. And this advertisement for 5G is actually portraying a similar scene, but much more idealized. Here, the policeman is really cool, has 5G-enabled glasses, and is following a thief through the city using scanning and to identify his face or gait or direction in which he's going. And I think it's quite interesting to see how a telecom provider, who of course wants to sell its 5G networks, is using this idealized application of machine vision in police work to promote the value of its products. So you can see that here, even if the perpetrator changes his clothes and wears some kind of disguise, it's not enough because the machine vision systems can still identify him and help police to trace him as he moves around the city. So also here you can see how, again, machine vision is represented with these overlays or augmented reality type of graphics to explain to the public how it works. But this is not the only way. It's not all about police. There's actually other interesting public performances of machine vision, such as in this other TV program that's more like a contest similar to what we have in Europe. In this specific episode, a person was pitted against a robot, a Baidu robot, and asked to identify the face of this person among several different school class photos. So, he had to look at a lot of images and try to identify the person as a kid. And while the Baidu robot was using a Baidu's face recognition system to do the same thing. And it's quite interesting to see how the competition is narrated, and there's a lot of suspense, and eventually both guess correctly, but the robot does it so faster. And you can see the robot kind of thinking, and the way intelligence is represented is quite fascinating. It's again a lot of overlays in blue and green, and the robot's eyes are moving to give the impression of thinking, and eventually there's the last suspense, and then things are revealed for basically arguing that the robot has more than human capability in recognizing people. So this is a sort of a big spot for Baidu, but it's also a way in which machine vision technologies are represented to TV audiences. And there are also advertisements that are more just about promoting products, like this advertisement for the Huawei disinfection robot. Here, machine vision is much more pragmatically represented as the ability to navigate a space, avoiding obstacles and scanning the environment before deploying tools like disinfection systems for hospital or other kind of venues. And there's also more utopian or what we call the aesthetics of soft utopia. For example, another advertisement by China Mobile for a consumer surveillance system that is much more subtle and showing happy people living their life thanks to small consumer surveillance cameras that they can check through their smartphone, and managing their restaurant or checking on their kid and making sure that everything proceeds smoothly in their life, that food is prepared in a safe manner, and that customers are satisfied. All of this is shown as a direct result of machine vision technologies, in this case, surveillance cameras and smart home systems that allow everyone to surveil whatever they want, basically, by installing these small cameras. So these already should give you an idea of very different imaginaries promoted by very different actors. And one very recent one that I found to be quite interesting is this one pitched by Baidu, this quite huge cloud computing company. And they just released this product demo on their research blog, in which they apply various AI and machine vision technologies to analyze the movements of Olympic athletes during the Winter Olympics and understand how they moved and what are their winning tricks, and then reproduce their movement in 3D or in VR. And they explain how this can be applied also during training and live events. So in a way, it's evident that machine vision and AI companies always are trying to pitch their products in various aspects of everyday life, especially when they're familiar with national audiences, like in the case of the Olympics. So this should give you a broad idea that machine vision in China is not just discussed in terms of policing futures or service robots or ubiquitous surveillance, but it's also showcased through entertainment or convenience and efficiency in everyday life. And this is what I wanted to look into. And the main way that I thought I could start looking into this is through websites. But I'm also, at the same time, also quite interested in how individual citizens, private citizens and users portray these technologies in their everyday life. And this is quite fascinating to look at by just browsing Chinese social media like TikTok, the Chinese version of TikTok, or other short video platforms, because you can come across a lot of short videos of machine vision technologies in everyday life, such as this video of someone laughing at a very incongruously huge QR code, or this other one of a user explaining and identifying different traffic surveillance cameras and explaining how it's possible to avoid them, or for example, this video of police robots also enabled by 5G in some urban pedestrian area, patrolling, or someone taking a video of an automated street light, pedestrian crossing that identifies jaywalkers or people who cross with the red light. And there's also funny examples of comedy skits. For example, this one in which a person is tricking another person by just crouching and letting the other person scan their face and pay with their face on a public kiosk. So there are even more controversial ones, such as this one in which guys are scanning girls and dating girls just by scanning the QR codes they're holding and fighting for them. So there's quite a lot of what I call vernacular creativity or portrayals of machine vision in everyday life that you can see through Chinese social media. And it's quite interesting how these systems are interpreted in the ways they fail or the ways in which they create social tensions or conflicts, or the ways they're perhaps disruptive of everyday life. So this is just to give you an idea of more vernacular depictions of machine vision. But what I wanted to do, or what we wanted to do with this project, was actually to focus on the Chinese machine vision industry. And the way we decided to go about this was to look at industry websites. So how Chinese machine vision companies depict themselves and how they imagine their technologies on their official web pages. So I know that web pages and websites are kind of out of fashion. We don't think about the web much anymore. We mostly look at social media. But actually, in this case, websites are the most centralized place where you can find information about a company. They're often updated and they're used for marketing or communicating with their consumers. And so they're easy comparable and easy to archive. So these seem to be the most immediate and accessible source. And one thing about the websites, especially industry websites, is that they're quite boring. So this is, for example, the website of Volcano Engine, which is the cloud computing platform of ByteDance. And ByteDance, in case you're not familiar with it, is the company that owns TikTok and its Chinese version Douyin and many other various social media platforms. So ByteDance, because of the success of TikTok's algorithmic recommendation system, decided to launch let's say customer-facing version of its recommendation engine. And basically, this is a full-stack cloud solution, cloud computing solution that they promote on this website. And Of course, in terms of imaginaries, we can already see some classic ones, like there's a lot of clouds, there's a lot of blue, and there's a lot of abstraction, which I will talk about more later. But you can see how different 3D renders and vague imaginaries of information highways and kind of abstracted urban landscapes, a lot of glowing blue lights, are all used to represent what is very hard to describe, that is data, cloud computing, processing of massive amounts of data for various purposes, including entertainment and business. So just looking at a website like this gives us some initial pointers to the aesthetics that are common in the industry. But ultimately, what our research has been about, as I said, has been quite boring in the sense that there is a lot of looking through menus, and in this case, trying to find out which segment of technology is artificial intelligence. In this case, it's this one. And then going through the various pages, there's endless pages like this person recognition and body recognition, image techniques, video technologies, natural language processing, and OCR and stuff like this. So what we did is, going through these websites, walking through them, just like I'm leading you through this walkthrough today, and clicking on all the various technologies that seem to be related or to be machine vision enabled, and then basically doing a aesthetic and content analysis of the website. So this page, for example, is the page for the Volcano Engine, sorry, person recognition and body recognition product. Again, the aesthetics are quite clear. Again, a lot of blue, a lot of abstractions about data, a very abstracted person that has been transformed into data, or statistical bars and charts, and their personal information being collected in some way, maybe. And then in the same page, you see how the company tries to explain these technologies in very vague ways. Here, the metaphor of vision is very evident as a human eye, but with augmented machinic gears in it. And then there's a bunch of statistics and data in the background to explain the concept of big data processing. And there's also, again, human bodies being rendered in kind of futuristic lab settings, and a lot of androids manipulating holographic surfaces. So there is nothing in this page that actually explains what the product does. There are very vague descriptors and a lot of science fictional, very cliched images. In this case, something about scoring someone or whatever as being recognized in this abstracted representation. So this is just to give you an idea of the sort of work we're doing. And in methodological terms, we have developed a quite streamlined process. So we go through this website and we take notes. In this case, we're using Google Docs, actually, because it's easy to do it collaboratively. And we write what would be ethnographic field notes if you were visiting some new place, but we do it for a website. And we augment this with photos, images, screenshots, and we try to pinpoint the interesting parts of a page and to build themes or recurring aesthetic tropes that we see in the web pages. And the second part of our method is to actually preserve these pages, because we notice that they actually change quite rapidly with updates and shifts in the industry. So in this case, we're using Web Recorder to take snapshots of each individual page we look at. And this is a quite simple web preservation tool that allows you to go back to any page you want and see it in its full interactive, just as it was. There's not a screenshot, it's an actual interactable web page. So this is what we've been doing, and we've gone through 6 of the 12 companies that we identified, and we'll keep going through them and analyzing their websites over the following months. So, and I will answer the question, what have we found, which should be the core of this talk. So since we are only halfway through the data collection and analysis, we have only tentative findings, but I can walk you through some of them through examples, just to give you an idea. Our first example is that different kinds of companies represent machine vision in different ways, which might seem self-evident, but we're trying to establish where these differences lie and which differences are relevant. And one thing we observe is that companies that focus on hardware products tend to present them very differently from companies that focus on software products. Perhaps this is because hardware companies require less imaginative work to visualize what machine vision is, where the software ones need more of this imaginative work. So for example, we can start from Huawei, with which many people will probably be familiar with. So Huawei is a massive Chinese tech company with a long history, and they do all kinds of products that are not directly related to machine vision. So if you want to actually find their machine vision products, you need to excavate a little bit and go into their business line and then find products like Intelligent Vision or Huawei Cloud. And if you go there, you actually see a whole line of cameras. And it doesn't matter if you cannot read Chinese here. The relevant part is just these two letters. AI. These are all so-called AI-enabled surveillance cameras for various purposes. And you can see that here the aesthetics are very direct. There's just the hardware. There's documentation, some depictions of Chinese urban settings, but in general, there's not much required to imagine what these cameras do, because you can just see the cameras and then get some practical examples of, for example, tracking car license plates on a street. It's a very direct representation. And the products themselves are quite self-explanatory. If you open an individual product page, you can see that they describe these cameras as having built-in neural processing units. So it's probably powered by some kind of machine learning. And they have the ability to recognize traffic violations. So they're probably trained on some data set of traffic violations. And all that we have is just a camera and then some technical specifications. But a very different thing is evident on the same website, but in the part that describes the cloud computing part of this system. Here there's no hardware. Everything is done on the cloud, and so we go back to those very abstracted representations of clouds and processing chips and cameras and money and gifts being connected to the cloud in some way. And if I play this video, you will see a very different imaginary of how this sort of cloud processing is imagined by Huawei and explained to its customers and audiences. So here we see, again, a very stylized cloud. That's the Huawei cloud that hovers above its various projected customers, including government units, police, surveillance authorities, and factories. And we see different products, all having their own cloud, little cloud, that then feeds into the more general platform cloud. And the cloud has different functions, and people are happy and things happen, especially business. And then the cloud reigns data, maybe money on various kinds of businesses. And finally, the actual hardware is introduced and is explained how people can just scan a QR code on the hardware and add it to their app and then monitor whatever they want. And finally, machine vision is visualized as these rays of light connecting devices to the cloud through some kind of processing or AI services. And then everything gets more connected and all the products are more functioning harmoniously. More connections between different platforms and services and functions of the various products. Things are packed inside clouds, data is shared and processed in different places and fed back into the surveillance cameras to improve their recognition capabilities. And there's a lot of moving stuff around. And finally, the result is orderly, green, productive, smoothly functioning urban grid, which is how many of these companies promote their products. They're actually quite related to urban governance and management. So already from just one company, we can see very different imaginaries being quite different from hardware to software, and then attempts at imagining machine vision in these abstracted ways to connect hardware with software. But if we move to another hardware-oriented company, we see very different articulations of machine vision, which is also interesting. In this case, DJI, I assume a lot of people are also familiar with it. It's one of the global leaders in the manufacturing of drones and drone cameras and camera stabilizers and action cameras. And it's actually quite interesting how their depiction of machine vision is also very focused on the hardware, because they're a hardware company. And if we open, we'll just take an example of one drone, this Mavic 3, one of the latest ones, we can see how machine vision is not a product, but a feature of their products. And so it is described in very pragmatic ways. Of course, there's a lot of rhetoric about seeing and believing, and image quality, and the use of good camera lenses and sensors, high resolutions. And after a while, machine vision comes in and it's visualized as actual components of the drone, additional sensors that help the drone sensing obstacles and visualizing them. So here we can see how this kind of wireframe augmentation of the hardware itself is used to explain where machine vision is and how it does help navigation. And if we look at some videos from DJI, we can see actually quite different applications of machine vision and how it is represented in practice. For example, one of the main applications of machine vision in DJI drones is avoiding obstacles. Here it's quite evident. Machine vision is directly connected to sensors, and it's visualized as these waves of light, blue and red, and then it scans the environment with this kind of matrix rendering. Of course, this is not what you really see when it happens, but it helps audiences and consumers visualize how the technology works. In another case, object tracking features are, of course, also invisible to the user, but DJI visualizes them through these kind of green brackets around objects. We're quite familiar with them, so we instantly know what they mean. It just means that the camera is tracking an object, so it's able to recognize a human shape and to keep it in focus. another aesthetic is this one. This is a more professional application of DJI drones for land surveying. And here we can see workers and managers interacting with the drone through this blue and green abstractions of flight paths or areas of they want to be scanned. So in this way, these abstractions help users to understand what the drone is seeing and where the drone is moving. And finally, there are also drones equipped with LiDAR scanners for more professional applications like scanning landscapes and buildings. And here the aesthetics are more directly related to what we commonly imagine scanning to be like. So there's a lot of clouds of data points and matrix-like augmented reality visualizations. Again, these do not exist in practice because they're not visible to the human eye, and they're not even visible for the drone. They're just data points that the drone processes. But all these visualizations that are quite direct are helpful for the companies to explain how machine vision sees as a cone of light and clouds of data points that then can be processed into 3D models for human consumption. So these are 4 quite different ways of imagining machine vision from the same company and from a very similar kind of product that you can all see here. So this was one example of hardware, more specifically. Now, if we move to the other side, so the purely software, purely cloud-based machine vision systems and products, it becomes quite evident that companies that focus on this kind of products require other imaginaries and different kinds of imaginative work. So I'm bringing you to SenseTime, which is one of the leading Chinese AI companies. And I think SenseTime's website is one of the most vague ones, has very little about the products themselves, and it exemplifies one key aesthetic register that companies use to explain their products. This is, if you look just at the homepage, we can see, well, business settings, international collaboration, and then we start seeing a lot of blue, of course, holograms, cityscapes, human manipulation of data, users interfacing with different devices, and self-driving cars, again, represented as wireframe renderings. And even just by looking at this banner that is scrolling here, there's quite an assortment of very consistent aesthetics through which AI and machine vision are imaged or represented. Data points, data clouds, cubes, abstract shapes, lights, holographic overlays, icons. It's not really clear what the technology is doing. There's just a lot of tropes and a lot of almost science fictional representations. If we go through some specific technologies, we see even more of these images. And this is a key aesthetics that we were calling either AI blue, or we're still trying to find out the actual name for the aesthetics, but it's basically this combination of luminous shapes, abstracted data points, matrices of blue lines that connect data to devices, and also silhouettes of buildings, data centers, or just abstracted representation of computing, like chips and circuits that don't really say anything about what the technology is doing. It just explains that it is computation, and there's someone who can, behind a screen, who can do stuff with it and do a lot of it. And the resulting driving application, the most concrete things we could find is this kind of image in which the city becomes its digital double, and the value here is basically urban management products, smart city management systems through which you can check traffic and deploy emergency services, stuff like that. So SenseTime is one of the examples in which we can clearly see this aesthetic at play. A lot of abstraction, even their more pragmatic, practical services like this traffic analysis server is not really showcased in any meaningful way. It's just explained that it does traffic management, and the image here is just this highway with some icons on top. We don't really know if it uses cameras, which kind of sensors, where is the data processed, how can people interact with it. There's not much. It's just a lot of imaginations and tropes here. And if we move to Megvii, which is a similar company, another huge Chinese AI provider, which focuses quite a bit on machine vision, we can observe another finding that I think is quite interesting. And this is related to translation and the internationalization and the imagined or the audiences that these companies want to reach. So for the websites I've showed you up to now, the Huawei, DJI, and SenseTime, those were actually quite similar in their English and Chinese versions. So this is why I showed them both. I didn't really compare them. But in the case of Megvii, it's quite interesting that our analysis, since we look at both versions and compare them, we can clearly see how Megvii represents their product differently for an international audience and for a national one. So this is the Chinese website, which is much more over the top, a lot of abstractions, very updated, Olympics, and the usual blue abstraction aesthetics. Whereas the English language one is very pragmatic. I mean, the main product they put here is this partnership they did with a store-friendly storage company. So it's a very different representation of machine vision. And it's a much simpler website in which they just illustrate their main products without much detail, and they have some news about their recent activities. But as you can see, they're updated up to 2 years ago. So this likely shows that software companies have less interest in promoting their products globally, perhaps because they sell them less for restrictions on cross-border flows of data, whereas companies like Huawei and DJI are much more actively in selling their products internationally. And so that's why their websites are more consistent across versions. So this is another tentative finding that we're trying to look into more. So trying to compare English and Chinese version of this website to see where they differ and where they are the same and what it might mean. And if we stay on Megvii, I'm not going to repeat, all the aesthetic discussions, because you should be familiar with them and you should be able to recognize all the components we already discussed. But something else that I think is interesting on the Megvii website, which is another finding we're focusing on, is the representation of users and consumers. Because these companies are selling to many kinds of consumers. They're selling, of course, to private consumers, but they're also selling to businesses, enterprises, public and private, and possibly government authorities that want to employ the systems. So we try to look at how the user or the subject of technologies is being imagined by these companies. And we're doing so by collecting and trying to focus on the images where technologies are visualized as in conjunction with a person or more than one person. So in this case, this is the MACV page for face recognition. And we can clearly see that each explanation of one of the features is visualized in a similar way. There is a person or more than one person, and there are some kind of overlay or rendering that explains the technology. It might be just a box around the face that recognizes where a face is. It might be a matrix that kind of explains searchability. It might be multiple boxes with labels that showcase gender and age recognition, for example. And what we observed consistently in most of the websites is that the representation says a lot about the imagined users and consumers. So men are often depicted in professional settings or contexts with a tie, a suit, or in an office or in a meeting, whereas women and children are depicted in home settings. So it's family life, taking selfies or playing with camera filters, and so on. Whereas for men, it's a much more serious business. And this seems to be a consistent form of representation on these websites. Of course, this is not surprising given how these tech companies globally have represented gender, age for many years. But it's interesting to see how it plays out in imaginaries of Chinese companies. So just to give you another example, this is a page of the MACV's face style AI-powered beauty solution. And this is framed in terms of generational terms. Generation Z is an increasingly important consumer group, and it's all about cosmetics and fashion and reinventing oneself. And of course, when we look at, when we scroll down to the product visualization, it's all women, and it's all about makeup, skin analysis, fashion, identifying facial features, and improving skin imaging and stuff like that. So it's quite striking to even just to compare these couple of pages, right? In which two products that are basically the same technology, right? They're face recognition, feature recognition, are illustrated in strikingly different ways for customers. This brings me to the last company which I would like to show you, which is Baidu. Now, I'm not saying that any of these features are specific to one company. I'm just using different companies to show you examples that actually these features are common to many of them. These websites, as you can see, are very consistent. Like they look almost the same. They all have this top menu, logo, abstraction. They could almost be the same company, but they're all like 4, 5, 6 different companies. But the reason why I want to show you Baidu, or in this case, Baidu's AI cloud, is because on the Baidu website, there is one kind of imaginary or actually a visualization tool that is quite unique. Other companies don't have that many. And that is the tech demo. So a few Baidu products actually have working demonstrations of their products. So in this case, this page is for, it's called a human image mangaification. So it turns you into an anime or a manga character, style of Japanese animation. And of course, this is just an application of neural network style transfer models to images. But what is interesting is that Baidu has put a demo here. You can see my face that I uploaded before, but they have some stock images, and they show you how it works. And this is actually working in real time. It's not a pre-calculated or prefigured thing, and you can just move this bar, and you can the code you see on the right is actually some of the output from the system. So what I find interesting about these demos is that they allow you to play in a minimal way with the systems that otherwise would be locked behind. You would have to buy them to try them. And this is very basic and doesn't say much. I mean, it just shows that, yeah, the program recognizes my face and it's more or less able to render me as an anime character. But if you want to play with it, I will copy paste the link in the chat because you might want to have a go and see what happens. Just a warning: this is Baidu's website, so whatever you upload on it, I don't know what they will do with it. So that's responsibilities with you, but feel free to play with it. But actually, the one that I would encourage you to play with is not this one, but the following one, which is also my last example. This is Baidu's image review tool, but as you can see in the URL, it's actually called image censoring, which might be a more honest description of its purposes. This tool is, again, an image analysis tool that Baidu is selling for 150 Chinese yuan for 1 million users for a company and enterprise consumers. And this product claims to be able to recognize pornographic, violent, and political symbols and forbidden behaviors like smoking or the presence of public figures and many other things in images. So the use that Baidu foresees for this kind of system is that social media companies can implement this as an image review tool to avoid users posting forbidden or sensitive content. And again, the interesting thing here is that Baidu offers a demo, and you can see it here. And in the demo, they have a quite interesting selection of photos. In this case, they used a photo from a protest, I think, in Syria, if I'm not mistaken, though I searched for it. And it is a pro-ISIS protest. And their system actually flags it as not suitable for publication because it shows political flags or other political symbols, which in this case is quite accurate. The next photo is more puzzling. This is a photo of a fire with two firemen fighting an explosion on a street, apparently. And the system says that this is not suitable because it shows violent terror. Now, the actual reason here in the output code is that in the image there is an explosive fire, so it's not suitable. But it's not clear why an explosion or fire would automatically be cataloged as terrorist violence. I mean, it could also have been an accident. And other images are even more puzzling. This one is categorized as pornography. I tried to, or at least as a sexier, too sensual image. I traced these images back, and most of them are open source or copyleft images, except the first one. But it's quite interesting to see the selection that they have decided to use as demos. This one is just it's a woman in a hoodie smoking, and it is categorized as not fitting because it shows unhealthy or non-ideal behavior. In this case, it says because there is a person smoking. So again, not clear why smoking would be identified as not ideal behavior, but I can imagine that they're showcasing how different platforms might want to not promote smoking on their social media services, stuff like that. Now, I would encourage you to upload your own photo if you want. I mean, I would, whatever you upload is your responsibility, but I think I'm at least comfortable with uploading my photo. And it's quite interesting because once I upload it here, what it recognizes is it's not sure that, it's not clear if it should be approved or not, but it says there is a possibility that there's a public figure in this photo. And it's quite interesting that when I go look at who the public figure might be, it turns out to be Brett Gamboa. And I searched for who this Brett Gamboa is, and he's an assistant professor, I think, at a university in the US, maybe at Cornell. And it is quite interesting that he is being flagged here, because if his name is in there, it means that Baidu's model has been trained on his photo. Now, he's not a public figure to my knowledge. So already putting my photo in this tech demo has allowed me to see something about Baidu's face recognition and identification model and what kind of data set it has been trained on. So the next step would be trying to look at some of the most popular data sets and see if Brett Gamboa, in this case, has been put in them. And he might not be happy about it, because who hands in a data set is also a highly political decision. And it's interesting that if I use another photo of myself, I get the same result, but with a different person. In this case, the name is transcribed in Chinese, but it's the name of Gennaro Gattuso, who is an Italian soccer player. I don't know how much I look like him, but it's also quite interesting that every photo I put actually says that there is a probability that I look like a public figure. So at this point, one can question whether this model is actually trying to find a similarity with pretty much any person that is non-Asian, or if it actually tries to find a similar person with anyone and just flags the possibility. So I will give you the link, and again, you take responsibility for what you give Baidu, but if you're curious and you want to test this system, I think it could be actually interesting to see who the system thinks you look like, or to know whose face ends up in these data sets. And this is the last case, an example I wanted to talk about, but I think tech demos like these are actually an interesting and useful way in which machine vision companies present and imagine machine vision, because they give you a quite responsive and immediate way to go beyond the just photos and videos and promotion, and to actually probe very little something about how these systems work and the ways in which they might not work so well, because these categories are quite arbitrary and sometimes hard to explain why they function in this way. So this was the last part of my talk, and I will just leave you with a deepfake cat from a Chinese social media platform that is I haven't talked about, but I'm also doing research on deepfakes. So that's another very interesting area in which machine vision is applied for more or less fun purposes by users who want to create all kinds of content. So thank you very much. I will quit this and change back to my camera. And I'm back. Yes.
Thank you so much, Gabriele. Really nice, fun ending. I guess that we will need to call you Gabriele Gattuso from now on.
Yes. If anyone is playing with that demo and they want to paste, who they ended up with,
yeah, I have in fact received some feedback about someone from the audience looking like Prince Charles. So it's a nice starting point, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you again for a very, very interesting presentation, looking at the tropes of all these artificial intelligence companies and how they portray themselves. There was some really interesting findings. Also, how reverse engineering all these demos show the data set that they are trained in. Looks like a really nice and interesting technique to learn about their models. I have a question from the audience, in fact, that I wanted to pass it over to you. It's do you think that the aesthetic vagueness, like vagueness that recurs on this tech giants website, is a means of either obscuring potentially dubious applications of the technology, or to conceal the workings of the technology to protect intellectual property rights, or maintain the monopolies?
I think probably a little bit of both, and I would not expect these companies to disclose, actual code or detail of how these things work. But it's interesting that actually some of these companies provide APIs and software development kits and access to their models. So if you buy them, you can actually play with them and see how they work and what they do. And it's not limited to companies. You could buy them as an individual, at least some of these products. So I think the vagueness and the kind of these aesthetics are more a way to promote this product and to emphasize what their imagined uses are, because often, as we know, these are not perfectly functioning technologies. They're not like flawless, and they're often much less precise or accurate or less actionable than they seem when they're presented as this ideal floating cloud and managing a perfect city or tracking all the people. Like as we said, I see some people are playing with it, and some of them are Prince Charles and Camilla Parker and things. These are just it's just a very arbitrary decision of the developers who have decided, okay, if the similarities between 0.7 to 0.9, flag it as possibly similar to a public figure. If it's over 0.9, it's actually that public figure. So it's not it's just an arbitrary decision when you look into the code. But if the companies show these products as in this very idealized manners that say it works. Look, this person is being identified. Everyone is tracked. It's giving them a score and labels. And it's easier to promote them and sell them as from business and companies and even governments that might be interested in having a product that works and thus helps them manage crowds or public services or traffic, something like that.
Thank you also from my side, Gabriele. It was great to have this journey also through content that it would be very inaccessible for most of the audience. So it was a fantastic tour and a bit of an adventure. I wanted to ask, because I think what is really interesting and has a lot of value is that through this kind of imagination that is given to us by this company, we can see through the values of this technology, right? And I know you've also written about this specific idea of Heikeji, this black technology in China. And I wanted also to ask you a little bit, what you think the specificity of these images reveal about China's machine vision and technology in general. Like it looks to me that is kind of similar in their like solutionist approach to this kind of idea of technology in order to perform different tasks, but still with this idea of kind of making the world more efficient and reliable. And even the game that we did right now, of course, was very playful, but it feels that it has this almost like objective way of like, oh, this machine is going to see who you are and find your face.
Yes, yeah, thank you. I mean, it was great to prepare and imagine this walkthrough. Yeah, I think the two things are quite related. So what I wrote recently about this idea of a black technology, which is a Chinese term, has nothing to do with blackness of race. It's a Chinese term for kind of like black box, but it's a more aspirational one. It's a more something about technologies that are incomprehensible but from the future, and they will change our lives, and almost mystical technologies. And I think machine vision, artificial intelligence are often described as black technologies in China, especially in the tech industry. And I think the imaginaries are quite similar because these companies, as we've seen, they try to kind of hide the functioning and the actual working and what is actually, where data is going, what is processing the data, which kind of models are being used behind these very glossy imaginaries of, abstract shapes, data centers, and immediacy and things like that. And I think it's quite surprising to me that these websites are all very similar, and they seem to all kind of learn from one another, try to keep up, and the imaginaries are very similar to tech companies around the world, especially in the US. I mean, the solutionist emphasis on efficiency, efficacy, and convenience is very similar in this sense. And of course, it is what they're selling, because they're selling, most of what they sell is speed, convenience in monetary terms, like automating work, automating human work, human labor, and making things more easy to process for companies, individuals, authorities on a large scale. So that's what they want to communicate, rather than how the thing actually works, because that would require maybe even admitting that when it might not work or not, or work less ideally. And I see there is a question here that asks black as in occult. So that Chinese term Heikeji it means literally black technology. The origin is actually quite weird. It comes from Japanese manga and anime, like a comic and animation, in which there were like a lot of science fictional technologies that were called black technologies. I don't know why the authors called them like this. I think it's connected to like black as in secret, or like black box as obscure, not as much as the occult meaning, but I'm not sure, because I haven't talked to the author. But it's interesting that in China this term is been translated from Japanese anime and manga, and then it has become a kind of buzzword in the tech world. But yeah, maybe it should be more like blue technology in this case, because it's all like blue and glowing and like very abstracted. But yeah, we're still working on the actual terms we want to use for this.
Thanks a lot. Maybe just a quick follow-up question, because we also briefly talked about this before the event. There is this idea of Sino-futurism, right? That is a sort of like come up through mainly, or at least at the beginning of the work of Lawrence Leck, and then discussions about this idea of the representation of China as in this kind of a future tense, right? Like, or this kind of future of China kind of dominating the world and in its own specific ways. What are your thoughts about that, and how do you see all of these technological companies and these images playing a part within that sort of context?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of future, I don't know if you can call it like cheap futurism or like cliche futurism in these company websites visualizations. Maybe it also comes from the fact that they use very standard 3D rendering. Sometimes you watch these videos and you think, couldn't they hire someone more, like, make something a bit more professional that's not just stock solids and things moving around. And it's interesting because Lawrence Leck did this works on, he started to think about Sino-futurism, and he also used this sort of almost retro CGI models and 3D environments years ago. I mean, like, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And I think it's interesting that Chinese tech industry has kind of caught up with that imaginary now, and is using it almost unironically or non-critically to promote things. But yeah, I mean, the more I watch these videos and I put them one next to the other, the picture that emerges is quite interesting, because it's as if this ideas of China as the future, and it's a future that's very for, at the moment, it seems a very already past, it's a future of like, 3D renders and a lot of scanning and recognizing things. I mean, we're kind of used to technology being able to do this. But what I find interesting is that these imaginaries of the future are very different from the, TikTok videos and WeChat videos that I showed before, in which people encounter cameras and QR codes and screens. And, it's quite the difference is quite striking when these technologies are imagined as, pervasive and seeing things and rays and glowing, and versus, you meet a camera, you meet a screen, maybe it doesn't work, maybe it's, the robot is not following a path. So it's quite interesting contrasts. But that's an interesting thing we could look more into, specifically trying to track if this website talk about the future. I can only remember one example. I think it was in China mobile surveillance cameras, that their slogan was something like, see into the future through technology, something like that, which was clearly basically saying that the camera also helps you not only surveil your surroundings, but also almost prevent thefts or prevent, prefigure what's coming. But it's an interesting thing. We should actually look more, maybe search for future-oriented terms in the rhetoric of these products.
In fact, I have a question that is sort of like a follow-up on this, going on to in this area of the future, asking that it's quite striking how much the visualization of AI, particularly hardware, relies on 3D modeling and simulation of software. I wonder whether this was, as the ubiquity of AI and 3D software are occurring simultaneously, so become equivalences in the imagining of the future. And if part of AI is visualized as it is taken in by the parameters and limitations of 3D programs, for instance, the use of meshes and simulations and so on.
Yeah, I think so. And I think many of these companies are actually constantly trying to pivot to the next big thing in tech, because, once you look behind the products, even just through their website, you realize that what they're selling is just computation. Like most of it is cloud computing in a data center or in a computing building they have, and then they can plug whatever model or service they want. So right now they're putting front and center face recognition, traffic management, natural language processing, depending on the company. But you can also see that they're starting to look into VR, augmented reality. Some of them just open pages for like the metaverse, and they're very abstracted. There's no product there. It's just, we will, you can build an avatar and then bring it into your games, or you can scan yourself and create a 3D model of your shop or your house. But it's not clear yet what the product is. So I think there's this constant trying to merge different products, or using this like general aesthetic referent of virtual reality, 3D space, to market all the other products that are kind of difficult to visualize. And so that's why these 3D sort of 3D rendering aesthetics or data cloud of data points are so pervasive, because perhaps they're the ones that people are most familiar with. I mean, even just from having watched The Matrix or Tron or whatever. So yeah.
I was also wondering if, like you mentioned briefly at the beginning that you focused on the websites. I was wondering if you have found any of these companies having any social media profile, and if so, what kind of images and also interaction with their audiences have? Because it's one of the most obvious thing when looking at the websites is like the humans are absent. There's no human on the image of AI companies. So like getting involved on social media, I guess that they will need to show some sort of like human behavior. And I would be interested in knowing about that.
Yeah, I think we focused on website because we found that the website is kind of the end point where the things, like everything starts from the website, and you have the English version and the Chinese version, or the international version and the Chinese version, and you can kind of compare them. because then these two versions branch into different social media ecosystems. So usually the Chinese one has links to WeChat groups or the company's official WeChat account that you can follow and add. But of course, that works only for people who have WeChat, which is mostly used in China. So, and I have followed some of these accounts or entered some groups, and it's quite interesting because they have they post more updated news, or they have contests, special offers. There's more engagement, of course, there. But it's very separated from the international one, which is often, sometimes they have Facebook or YouTube channels where they put some product demos. For example, the one that I posted about the Baidu Olympics analytic product, that was also, I think, posted on Facebook and YouTube by Baidu. So they definitely have a social media presence. But for what I've seen, the international ones are not that interactive. There's not a lot of interaction with the audience. And the Chinese ones are much more active. But it's like separated because, of course, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter are not accessible from China unless you have a VPN. So I guess these companies don't have an incentive to really engage much there. And the Chinese social media platforms are less accessible from the outside unless you're familiar with them and you can read the language. So it's probably why they're, in terms of audience and engagement with the public, they're quite separated. But I am following, especially the Chinese ones, trying to see how things differ from the website to social media. But I think the website is kind of this meeting point where you can start from, and it's also quite, it's a bit more stable and public facing than social media profiles in some way.
Thank you so much. And I think on that note, if there's no other question from the audience, I'd like to thank Gabriele once again for this wonderful screen walk.
Thank you, it was great.
Now left us to wanting for more, with more also deep fakes in China. We will read more and see more about that, and we should also with the future research.
Thank you from my side too, Gabriele. It's been a pleasure. It's been so interesting to hear about your research. Just to remind everyone that we will be back in 2 weeks with June Yu, looking into how a group of scientists is analyzing the light that reflects a certain kind of forest in Finland. So looking also into artificial intelligence models. So we invite everyone to come in 2 weeks to join us again. Okay, we will do the traditional unmute all, and just in case you want to just